For our final research assignment, I decided to do my topic on cow's milk. Right now in the market, there's a lot of different alternatives like soy, almond, and coconut milk, but I thought that cow's milk was a good choice just because it goes from an animal source on the farm and has to go through a very long process until a consumer can finally purchase it at the local store. So before I got into the different regulations that it has to follow, I wanted to start with some facts that kind of show how industrialized the system has become and why it is that way. So, the US is the single largest producer of cow's milk in the world. And in addition, 13% of that product is exported to other countries. We also do import some dairy products as well. The top 5 producing states are California, Wisconsin, New York, Idaho, and Pennsylvania. And 20% of all the milk that is produced at dairy farms is converted into fluid milk and cream. I wanted to give a brief overview of the milk production process. Just keep in mind that there's different agencies involved at each step, and also there's different regulations in place. So milk production begins on the farm with the dairy cows. They're either allowed to graze feed or they are kept in a confined animal feeding operation, as this first photo shows. Cows are machine milked at least twice a day, and this shows how industrialized the industry has become, and more of the practices we depend on today were not around when this industry first began. After the milking process, the milk is kept in a vat or silo for no more than 48 hours, and then it is transported by a refrigerated tanker to the processing facility. Before it can be accepted by that facility, the milk that was kept in storage is lab tested for antibiotic residue and also other quality standards. If antibiotics are found, then the milk is rejected and the farmer is either fined or they lose their license to sell. After testing, if it is not rejected, then it is accepted by the processing facility and can go through pasteurization, homogenization. Some of them go through microfiltration or ultra high temperature treatment to increase the shelf life. And then the packaging machines fill and seal the milk into either paper cartons or plastic jugs. It is then kept in a refrigerated room until it can be delivered to the stores for sale to the consumer. So I will begin with going over the different regulations. And before I go over the most important ones right now, I want to go over the different agencies. All of these agencies have different jurisdiction and over different stages of the production. So the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, has regulations for confined animal feeding operations. These are dairy farms that have up to 700 dairy cows per unit, and they also have regulations monitoring manure practices. The Humane Society works with different states to get laws passed for humane treatment of dairy cows. They recently passed a law in California that bans the practice of tail docking, which is cutting off 2/3 of a cow's tail. FSA, the Farm Service Agency, is a division of USDA. They are in charge of the Margin Protection Program for dairy producers, which I'll get into later. The FTC helps with fair competition between businesses and also enforces and monitors different marketing schemes for milk. USDA Organic, the National Organic Program, has different regulations and requirements for a farm to meet their standards. FSIS, the Food Safety Inspection Service, is a division of USDA as well, and they are in charge of grading and inspection services of dairy facilities. FDA has total jurisdiction over milk, and this goes with labeling, inspections. They also work with a lot of state governments to do the inspections. And they also are in charge of one of the largest mandates over the dairy industry, which I'll get into next. The Grade A Pasteurized Milk Ordinance is probably the most important regulation out there right now for the dairy industry. It was started by the U.S. Public Health Service and the FDA back in 1924. At that time, it was called the Standard Milk Ordinance. Just a reminder that pasteurization is the process of heating particles to an exact temperature for a specific amount of time. And it can be low temperature, high temperature, and as shown by this graphic below, the process it goes through can increase the shelf life. So in 1987, it was mandated and put in the Federal Register, and it's now within our Code of Federal Regulations. And it is a program for the certification of interstate milk shippers. So it bans all unpasteurized milk from crossing state lines. All 50 states and U.S. territories have adopted it and follow it, and some of them also have stricter state regulations as well. They also are allowed to sell milk and have their own regulations on that, but they aren't allowed to cross state lines. And grade A milk is the only milk involved in this ordinance, and fluid milk can only be grade A milk. Next, I wanted to review the organic regulations. Farms that follow the requirements set forth by the National Organic Program that began in 2002 can use the USDA organic seal on their product, as long as they are accredited by a third-party verifier. So even though overall milk sales have been decreasing over the years, organic milk has actually increased in sales. From 2008 to 2014, it rose 72%, and this is due in part to many farmers are switching over to this process because they make more money. The National Organic Program has grazing requirements. So cows must graze for at least 120 days of the year. It doesn't have to be continuous if there's severe weather, and it has to be outside. Records have to be kept on antibiotic use and also what kind of feed is being used. For a conventional farm to switch to a organic farm, it takes about 3 years because you also have to switch your crops over. For my 3 stakeholders, I chose the U.S. dairy industry, the consumer, and raw milk advocacy groups. The U.S. dairy industry is the stakeholder with the most to lose. It's no surprise that in recent decades there's been a decline in demand for cow's milk. Other sources have been coming up, people have been going to different beverages. Milk isn't necessarily a drink that people have 3 times a day with each meal. Also, there are concerns over the increased regulations. Not only are all states and all dairy farms following grade A PMO, but also they have new FSMA regulations they have to follow, and they each have to abide by their own state regulations. The Margin Protection Program for dairy producers, this is through Farm Service Agency, and they will actually buy an overage of milk to help with these costs because of the decreased demand. The only problem is this program is only effective until 2018, so after that there's no word on whether there will be a new program to help with the deficits that farmers are enduring. And lastly, as the milk industry declines, the organic industry is increasing, which isn't a bad thing, but if you think about even though people are buying more organic milk, the market isn't growing as fast as the number of farmers that are turning to this different system. So many of their products are being sold conventionally anyways because the market is not large enough. For consumers as stakeholders, I think the biggest issue in the world today is they don't know what to believe. Many consumers want transparency on where their milk is coming from and the different processes it undergoes before it reaches the store shelves. However, they also want to know if milk is actually a healthy source of getting the essential nutrients and vitamins. So FDA does regulate which claims can go on bottles, and they have to be non-misleading. They are allowed to say no artificial growth hormones. You can say contains this many nutrients or this many grams of protein, nutrient content claims, structure function claims, having calcium be for strong bones, as long as you have some kind of scientific study to back up your claim is acceptable. However, in the media and in articles that consumers have access to, there's just a lot of controversy on whether milk is the best source of these nutrients and whether a different alternative source of milk is better or healthier. So I think that is more concerning to the consumers overall, is just this inconsistency of knowledge about the product. As I was doing research for my paper, I kept coming across articles and websites that had this idea of Raw Milk Nation. And so I decided to use them as one of my stakeholders. So these raw milk advocacy groups, the concern with them and the issue with them is that they just want the right to be able to drink and sell the milk that they produce that hasn't gone through pasteurization. And many people believe that raw milk has health benefits over pasteurized milk. The reason that unpasteurized milk has been banned by the FDA is because there's studies shown by CDC that if you were to sell raw milk, it would increase the incidence of foodborne illness. So it has been banned for a reason. However, the right to be able to drink it should still remain with the people, and that's what these groups advocate for. So I included a chart of different state regulations. So 13 states allow in-store sales, 17 states allow on-farm sales, 8 states allow cow share agreements, and 20 states have banned the sale of all raw milk. And an interesting fact is that all states allow drinking raw milk. It is legal. However, how are you going to drink it if you don't have access to it and it can't cross state lines? So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening, and please leave all comments and questions in the discussion board for this week. Thank you.